How much? Sorry? You don't have to do much flying control, you just watch you need. Oh, I see. Like that? Right, ladies and gentlemen. Over there. Floor is yours.
Right. Fantastic. Well, normally I start at this point with all the tedious introduction, but you've already had quite a good introduction and even a group photo taken with the drone. So it came out quite well. It's at ISO 1600. It's quite noisy. Do you think we could have the light on at the back of the room, just in case I want to hold it up and? Yeah, you can still see that. Okay. Yeah, that's good. So yeah, and if I zoom in on that, you can see the quality is still pretty good. You can pick out your faces. Someone taking a photo there. There's Terminator. So I mean, it's not ideal conditions. Normally, I wouldn't photograph at dusk, but so there's a closer one there.
That's not dusk. That's the
Golden hour, absolutely. In fact, the sun was still up because you can see it there. I've just realised that I have an enormous amount of sensor dust all over the sky. Awful. So, let's start with the actual talk. As I say, I've explained a lot already. Can you all hear me okay, by the way? So my involvement with drones started, as I mentioned, through the radio control modelling communities on the internet. I started flying radio control aircraft back in '98 or so. Started with simple gliders, moved on to electric-powered park flyers, little small things, then larger electric aircraft. And then I stumbled across a forum of people strapping cameras to their model aircraft, and that really sparked an exciting idea in my head. And I started building platforms specifically for carrying digital cameras. Back then, I think, actually, I mentioned that in the. There's a picture here that explains what I'm talking about. So I won't go through this. This is just what's in the talk. So let me introduce myself formally. David Hogg, LRPS, Director, Horizon Imaging. And so I'm based in Hampshire. I live in Aldershot, and basically operate across the south of the UK. And as well as the drone photography, I also have a 50-foot telescopic mast, which is useful for times when I can't use the drone in built-up areas, next to main roads, that sort of thing. I also do video production and virtual tours, which is something that's quite new that I'm offering as a commercial service, where you can click and drag around virtual environments on the computer and click on doorways to jump through into the next room, that sort of thing. I'm trying to offer a whole package of different services that all support each other. So as I said, keen model aircraft flyer. This was one of my early balsa wood park flyer models that I built just for fun. And then shortly after that, I got into building platforms for cameras. And that was the first one I built about 2005. All balsa wood again, followed a design on one of the forums on the internet, rcgroups.com, where someone else had built this exact model. He designed it from scratch to carry a camera. I used it to carry a Casio Z750, 7 megapixel, still pretty good camera, even by today's standards, but it's a tiny little sort of shirt pocket sized thing. And with that, I took this, which is still probably my favorite most favourite aerial photograph of Claremont Fancourt School in Esher in Surrey. So that's where I went to school, and after I left I asked if I could use their playing fields as a sort of practice training ground for taking aerial photos, and they're still using that photo to this day. That was taken in 2006, so yeah, they're still using it, which is fantastic, because that, it's a grade 1 or grade 2 listed building that no one has ever seen from that perspective before. And unless someone else goes there with a drone, probably no one else ever will see it from that exact perspective again. Let's talk about drones then. You already stole my thunder earlier in the evening. The Oxford English Dictionary say that a drone is a low, continuous humming sound, or someone droning on and on for ages about, but that's probably not so much of interest this evening. This is probably what most people think of when you mention the word drone. They've had quite a bad reputation. If you say the word drone, most people think of the military things, often with weapons on them, which has given the word drone a bad name for itself. I did a bit of research. The origin of the word drone actually comes from bees. So you've got 3 types of bee: the queen, which is the biggest, the worker, which is the main one that you see in hives, and then this one called the drone, which has a pretty simple life. It basically does absolutely nothing at all apart from wait for the queen to become receptive to mate with it. And then once it's mated, it dies. So from that, people used the word drone for things like this, which is basically an unmanned torpedo with wings. So it has one sole purpose, and after it's fulfilled its purpose, it destroys itself, either by crashing or blowing up or something. So that's where drones have got their negative connotations from. But it's interesting. I did a search. This is a little graph that shows the popularity in Google searches of the word drone since 2005, I think. And very little down here, 2005, 6, 7, 8. And then you start to get news stories about military drones. So drone kills 4. And then that amazing story of Iran capturing a downed drone, and then the US asking to have it back. And then probably the first thing in the news that people, where drones started to have a civilian application, was when Amazon announced that they were going to start delivering things with the drones about 2014, so very recently. And then there's another one about Israel shooting down a drone. But really, as soon as Amazon mentioned this or used the word drone for a civil application, then people started calling these things drones, and now the name has just stuck. As I say, they're made out to be bad and evil things, but they're not really. And there's a picture of my one flying, which you've just seen flying, which I don't usually get the chance to say. Applications, where do I start? Anything aerial related, basically. Photography, this is another of my favourite shots. This is St Martha on the Hill Church in Chilworth, near Guildford. If you've got good eyesight, right in the background there is Guildford Cathedral. And I took that just for fun, 2011 I think, with a slightly smaller model. Similar idea, it had 3 propellers instead of 6. That had a Canon PowerShot S95, another little tiny shirt pocket camera, but a very good. You okay? That was taken with one of these shirt pocket cameras, but it had full RAW capability. So a 10 megapixel RAW file out of that camera, post-processed several times over the period of years. Each time I've tweaked it a little bit more, and you can blow that up to 30 by 20 inches, no problem, and it looks fantastic. In fact, I've got that in my office as a 30 by 20 print. So that's photography. Filming is not something that I've mentioned yet. This is a screenshot from one of the early Harry Potter films. You might recognize it if you've seen the films. And this scene, there was a train going over a viaduct, and this flying trabby, or whatever it is, sort of looped and rolled around through the archways, and that was taken with an early form of drone. Back then, early 2000s, it would have been a miniature gas turbine-powered model helicopter. So a more conventional layout, a big rotor on the top, little one at the back. And the only technology that existed then to get a heavy film camera up in the air for a usable length of time, they used these miniature gas turbines, which still exist. But obviously, there's very, very noisy, very smelly. They don't have high vibration because they're very well balanced. But electric technology has advanced so much over even the last 5 years to make this sort of thing possible. And now, generally, drones that are used in films are all electric powered, and you can get ones that carry a 5-kilo camera for 20, 30 minutes quite easily if you're prepared to spend the money on it. Another application is inspection. This is something I'd love to do more of because it's an ideal application for this technology. This is a care home, what used to be an old school in Hazelmere in Surrey, and this part, it's a long building that goes around in a U shape. They wanted to refurbish this building and turn it into part of a care home with other new buildings that they were building around it. And initially they were going to use cherry pickers or put scaffolding up around to have a look at the quality of the roof, but instead they asked me to come along with my drone, and I just flew around the perimeter of the roof, took lots of high-res photos, and they used that instead of using a cherry picker to analyze the condition of the roof. Obviously, if you need to get men up there to do work, then you can't carry them up with a drone. But that probably saved them, a few £1,000s. And whether it's roofs, steeples, weather vanes, anything, or even a lot of companies are using them for high-tension power cables. Normally you'd have to lower men down onto the wires in a cage, whereas with this you can have a drone hovering next to it with a good zoom camera, and you can get fantastically detailed images without any risk to any people. Another one is mapping, which again is something that you just can't do with any other platform. This is an example of a radar map. So a drone, possibly not with rotors, maybe a fixed wing, just a normal aircraft drone, little thing, was probably programmed to fly a search pattern over this ground. I'm not sure what it is. And it would take pictures every so many seconds, and then on using software on the computer, it would stitch it all together. And if you're using a radar sensor, for example, you'd then actually you could rotate this thing as a three-dimensional model. So if that was, say, an open cast quarry, you could fly a drone over one day, take a very detailed 3D model of the contents of the quarry, do it a year later, and you can see how the amount of contents of the quarry has changed. And this is all done autonomously, so you can just put waypoints into an iPad or something, press go, and it'll take off, do its thing, and come back and land right next to you. It's just incredible what they're being used for. Surveillance. I think this picture was used a lot in the newspapers because back in the days when the regulations about where you could fly these things were a bit vague, one police constabulary bought a drone and started using it for following criminals, and then they had their drone confiscated by, I don't know who it was, it wouldn't have been the police that confiscated their own drone. But the CAA said, excuse me, hello, you're not allowed to fly that there, sir. And a few months later, they then got their license to use it, and then they've been using it for, even if it's just, I don't know, following burglars that are running into a woodland before you can get the real helicopter there. One of these with a little thermal imaging camera on it, sending back live video like we had earlier this evening to someone on the ground. You can follow people. I was going to say the sky's the limit, but that's a bit of an old metaphor. Delivery, that's something I mentioned earlier with the Amazon thing. At first I thought this is a joke, it's an April Fool. But it seems that companies like Amazon are really pursuing this, mainly in sort of smaller islands to start with, whilst they work out the regulations of how they can get these things flying over our heads. I can't see it happening in the next, couple of years, maybe the next decade, just because of the logistics of doing it. But one thing where delivery is very interesting, I'll come back to that, this is an example in Africa. This drone is actually taking a little box full of blood samples from a very remote village in the middle of Africa with very poor road access. So the drone was sent there from miles away. It was programmed to go and land there. The people then loaded the samples onto it, and it flew back to whatever it was, a medical base. And it did that in maybe half an hour, which would have taken by land, maybe 4 or 5 hours of really difficult driving through muddy, unmaintained roads. So it's applications like this that I find really, really exciting. One I just skipped over. This is, I don't know if it's actually been put into production, but this was a Dutch idea. This thing carries a defibrillator, and using GPS, it can be sent exactly to where you need it, wherever that might be. And the clever thing is that on board is a tablet type of device that connects you with a paramedic remotely via video link. So not only do you get this life-saving equipment, but you get a video link to someone else who knows how to use it. And so the idea is, this thing lands, and you get taught, or it's explained to you how you have to use it to save someone's life. And there are stories popping up like this almost every day, and it's I just can't wait to see what other ideas people have. I ended on this one. This is a great cartoon of Santa being harassed by lots of Amazon delivery drones trying to deliver his presents. Always good for a chuckle, that one. So yes, just about anything, any type of sensor, any type of payload carrying, these platforms are ideal. So a brief word about the state of the art. As I was saying to some other people earlier, this is, I built this model myself. It's not perfect. The next one that I'm working on, I have actually bought off the shelf, because this one took forever to build. So for this size of platform for carrying that sort of camera, you're looking at something like this if you bought it off the shelf. This one has 8 propellers, and the whole concept of this multi-rotor helicopter, I briefly touched on it earlier. It's obviously mechanically very simple compared to a conventional helicopter that has servos and push rods and things that can all bend and go out of alignment. You've literally got X number of motors, 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, even 12. And as I mentioned earlier, good redundancy. So with an octocopter as it's called, you could lose 1 or even 2 motors and it could still fly all right. And the multi-rotor concept is very scalable. So you can get ones that literally fit in the palm of your hand, that are about this big, scaling right up to ones that can actually carry a person. I've seen a video on the internet of a crazy German inventor actually sitting in the middle of one of these things that he built with the same radio control handset that I was using, flying himself around, which is quite mad. But that goes to show, if you want to carry more payload, you just use bigger motors, bigger propellers, and bigger batteries. And as I touched on with the mapping idea, they can be very autonomous. So with GPS, they can be told to go anywhere and do anything, pretty much. And even today, people are developing technology that allows it to follow people on the ground if they've got a special radio tag on them. So if you wanted to film yourself doing some action sport or something, you could wear one of these tags and preset this thing to follow you at a certain height without you actually having to fly it at all. And it's, the technology is out there to do this, little radio transmitters, GPS receivers, and people are just writing code to make it all possible. It's quite amazing. Yes, selfie stick. That's I don't even want to try and think what they'll call this. The droney stick. I don't know. I also touched on this earlier. This is another, I would say, equally important development in the last 5 or 6 years that has happened to aerial photography with this type of platform, is the gimbal, the thing that the camera sits in. Previously, they would have been controlled by little analog servos, the sort of little square things. It's basically a tiny motor and a gearbox. They're quite good. They're not particularly accurate, and if you've got a camera being moved by them, you'll see jitter, and they don't hold their position very well. But these things that I'm using on here, they're actually the same principle as the electric motor that spins the propeller. So these motors, they have one moving part, which is the propeller, the shaft that goes through, and the outer casing here. And in the middle, there's just the windings, the copper windings. And this concept is exactly the same as the thing that moves the gimbal. You can see the copper inside here. It's just wound in a different way to give it a very high torque, a high twisting power. And as soon as people started experimenting with these, they're called brushless motors. Brushless motors combined with a little computer and a little sensor mounted onto the camera tray that detects the position of the camera. These have just revolutionized how simple it is to get really good quality video from these flying contraptions. And once you've got a 3-axis gimbal like this is actually my next platform that I'm building. 3-axis means that it's stabilized in roll, pitch, and yaw. And either it can be self-leveling, or you can give a controller to someone else, and they can point and steer the camera themselves. So for more complex aerial video work, I would fly the helicopter, say, at a preset height along a road or something, and then the camera operator could have complete control of the camera to follow an object that's moving along the road, for example. At the moment, I operate as a one-man band, as it were, so I'm doing the flying and the controlling, so I can't do very complex aerial video shots. For that reason, you need...
limit on the speed. I mean, supposing you wanted to do Formula 1, for instance.
I think that probably the fastest you can fly something like this is around 50 miles an hour, perhaps. Not this one. This is I wouldn't take that much past 10, I think. But a proper commercial off-the-shelf platform, you could maybe not keep up with fast cars, but you could at least track them and fly alongside them, and then the camera operator could pan the camera around to follow whatever it is that you were tracking. And as I say, this whole technology has been as important a development as the helicopter itself. And there's a note at the bottom here, can be flown or carried. So someone who's developed these gimbals had the bright idea of taking it off the helicopter and putting some handles on it. And that has revolutionized the cinematography industry, because rather than having a Steadicam rig, which is a very, very heavy mechanical system with big arms and springs that supports the camera, this allows you, with very good quality digital cinema cameras, to have a completely self-leveling, rock-solid camera. And the sort of shots that I've seen taken with these rigs, and as an example that I use, there's one video I've seen where a man was running through a building. He ran out of the door, and obviously the cameraman was running after him. The cameraman then passed the camera to someone on rollerblades and followed this guy at high speed down the street. And then the guy hijacked a car or something and got inside, and the cameraman passed the camera in through the window into someone inside, and that was all in one continuous shot, which you just couldn't do with a Steadicam rig. The operator would probably faint if you asked him to try and do that. So it's interesting how it all evolved. So this 3-axis gimbal evolved for the helicopter, and now it's gone on to revolutionize ground-based filming as well. So this is the important question. Can anyone buy their own drone? And the simple answer is yes. There's nothing to stop anyone buying a platform like this. There are umpteen shops on the internet and even in the high street like Maplin that stock this sort of thing. And you don't need any license, there's no prerequisites for owning one. But that is where there are some problems arising. I didn't actually learn to fly a radio control aircraft at a model flying club, but that tends to be the route that most people go down, because you go there with your new model aircraft, you've got no idea how it works. You get taught how to look after it, how to maintain it, how to fly it safely by expert pilots that you meet there. And this whole sort of teaching philosophy means that you end up being a very good pilot. You know how to maintain the platforms and operate them safely. But if anyone just goes into Maplin and buys this thing, they read the quick start guide, plug it in, and they go off flying down their high street, they don't necessarily know that there are rules in place that are there for the safety of others. So one of the regulations is not to fly near people, buildings, or cars, for the reason that if one of the motors or propellers fail, then it generally, these things fall down on whatever is beneath them. And that's where you're starting to get stories in the news, or people flying them near airports. There was one near miss near Heathrow last year. The pilot actually saw one of these things out of his window, which is quite horrifying if you think what could have happened if it went in one of the engines or hit the windscreen or something. So yes, this is no longer becoming the route into model flying, which is a cause for concern. So there are things that are starting to happen. The manufacturers are starting to release more formal and detailed guidance on how to fly these things safely. And there are organisations like the BMFA, the British Model Flying Association, that are really trying to make it known that there are regulations about where you can and can't fly these. The BMFA offer insurance for any type of model flying. It's about £30 a year, and it gives you £2 million public liability insurance. You can then sign up to join one of your local model clubs, and that's really the best way into model flying, but not everyone knows that that route exists. So the main sorry, this is not particularly interesting, but I think it is important to mention. There's this document written by the Civil Aviation Authority called the Air Navigation Order, and this basically covers regulations that deal with everything that flies, something from this size up to full-size airliners. And there are a couple of important points in it. A lot of them are actually common sense. So this Article 138, a person must not recklessly or negligently cause or permit an aircraft to endanger any person or property. It's quite straightforward. You shouldn't fly these things in a manner that if there was a component failure, it could land on someone's car or land on someone's head, that sort of thing. There are other more specific articles about how far away you're allowed to fly, how high you can fly. And then in one of the other articles, it mentions the 50-meter limit. So whether you're doing it commercially or not, you're not allowed closer than 50 meters from people, vessels, vehicles, or structures not under your control, which can be a bit restrictive, but if you're flying in a park and there's no one else around, then you'll be quite safe. It's just when you're flying down a busy high street, you've got people looking up at this thing, getting distracted. You don't really want to think about the consequences if it did fall out of the sky onto someone. So, and the CAA have also released a little pamphlet with quite simple instructions. You're responsible for each flight. Check the drone for damage before each flight. Keep it within line of sight. That sort of thing. And then that's the next thing. If you want to do it commercially, you have to get a license from the CAA, and that's quite a lengthy, drawn-out process these days. It used to be very easy, but there are more and more hoops that you have to jump through. It basically, I think I'll make a list of it here. You have to supply evidence of your competence as a pilot. So you go on a 3-day ground training course where they teach you basically the rules of the air, how to look after your platform, how to fly it safely, and you have to write an operations manual. It's all quite dry and tedious. It shows them that you're a safe and competent operator. I tend to compare it to driving licenses. It's quite an ordeal learning to drive a car, getting a license, but you wouldn't want the roads full of uninsured drivers that have just bought the car from the local showroom and just gone off and driven it without learning how to use it. I feel it's much the same with this technology, because they can be dangerous if they're used incorrectly and if people aren't aware of the dangers that they pose.
Picture of a house there was to ask a question about.
Yeah.
What's the definition of under your control? Because supposing you want to take a estate agent wants to take
Yeah.
a photograph of someone's house.
Yeah.
There are other houses within 50 metres.
Yes.
You just have to ask permission from the neighbours, or
Basically, yeah. So really, it's. I suppose part of it comes down to common sense. If you're a homeowner and you see this thing flying near you and they haven't asked you for your permission, you could probably get a bit upset. So I'm quite fortunate that the sort of houses I photograph tend to be, on their own in the middle of the countryside. But I think, in this case, there weren't other houses near, but before every flight I do, I will look on Google Earth or something, and you can actually use a ruler to measure how close the thing you're photographing is from other buildings. And if a house that the estate agent wants me to photograph is near someone else's house, I'll say, I can't photograph this without their permission. So they might then say, okay, well, we'll just use the mast instead. Or we just go up and ask their permission, and so far I've never had any problems. Usually they're so fascinated they want to come and watch it. So it's just about being a responsible operator, really. And yes, there are instances where it's just completely unfeasible to use a drone, like in the middle of a city, where virtually everything is within 50 meters of you, and it's just impossible to get permission from everyone to fly something in the middle of a city. That said, there are companies that do operate in London for filming music videos, that sort of thing, and if you arrange with the local authorities to cordon off the roads for half an hour or something, then you can operate safely in that manner, even though it is in the middle of a city. But I tend to stick with stuff that's in the countryside because it's a lot easier, a lot less red tape to jump through, even if you jump through red tape. I did do one shoot actually in London on the Thames. It was a new housing development there, and that was an absolute nightmare to get permission because firstly it was on the Thames. It was just opposite the Isle of Dogs, so with Canary Wharf. I had to get permission from the what are they called, Port of London Authority, because they own the Thames. Initially they said no drones allowed, and so I slowly negotiated with them and said, well, what if I do it at low tide and if I stay at the edge of the river? And they said, oh, well, that actually sounds quite reasonable. And the Thames is actually used as a flight route for helicopters, full-size helicopters, because the water is a safe splashdown area in case of engine failure. So I contacted London City Airport, asked them would it be a problem. They said, no, it's no problem provided you stay below 200 feet or something. And it took a month or so to get the permission. But in the end, I satisfied everyone's requirements and I got the shots. Let's see if I can find them quickly, actually. It was in January this year. There you go. So it's, it was a bit of a grey day, unfortunately, so that sky is actually artificial. But so what I arranged to do is that I wouldn't fly further than 50 meters from the riverbank, because here the river is too shallow for boats to enter anyway, so that kept the Port of London Authority happy. And then I was keeping 50 meters from these buildings here, and I took off from here, and yeah, I managed to get all the shots that the client needed. So that particular client was actually the roofing contractor, so they had done the roofs here and they wanted an interesting shot of their work for their portfolio. So it's, generally they're not waterproof, no, and I don't fly in rain partly because they're not waterproof, but also the photos would look quite drab as well. Yes. You can get waterproof versions for filming yourself, surfing, or if you want to get very close to the water or something. But the sort of platforms I use, I don't fly in those sort of environments. But that's not to say that the technology doesn't exist. there's a body called RPAS, the Association of Remotely Piloted Aircraft Systems. They've been set up specifically to look after the commercial use of these things in the UK. Very useful organisation if you were thinking of doing this commercially. There's a forum of people just like me on the internet, and you can ask each other questions, and if you've got any problems of getting permission and that sort of thing, then they're there to help you out. Just briefly blow my own trumpet, if you don't mind. One thing that does make me chuckle is when I call something like a golf course to try and, advertise my services, and they said, "Oh, my son Freddie's just bought a drone, so I don't think we need your services." So I politely say, "Okay, thank you very much, goodbye." People think that owning the equipment is all you need to do to take good photos. It's just like buying a good camera. It doesn't make you a good photographer, as I'm sure you're aware. So I've actually written a set of guidelines on my website which list questions to ask a potential aerial photography company before you employ their services. And I've worded it in such a way so that it says, "Do you have a license from the CAA?" I do. Are you good at image post-processing? I am. I have 10 years experience. So there's a few things to look out for. Obviously, they have to be licensed and insured. This is my license from the CAA. If you're going to hire a company that uses these things, you should ask to see their permission from the CAA. If they can't present you with it, then they probably don't have it and they should be avoided. Use professional cameras. A lot of the drones that you can buy use these GoPro cameras, they're okay. They're surprisingly good quality for their size, but I'm an advocate of using the best camera that I won't say that you're prepared to buy, but I would consider this type of camera as the lower limit of very good quality. These 24 megapixel pictures you can blow up nice and big. Oops, sorry, dazzling you with the laser pointer. You can blow the pictures up very big, so there's no worry from the client's point of view. Oh, can we blow it up on a billboard to put next to the road? The quality is there. And post-processing, as I'm sure you're aware, is half of being a good photographer, is doing very good post-processing. This is an example of the original aerial photo that I took, and then this half has been post-processed in the way that I post-process my images to give to the end client. And it never ceases to amaze me when I look on the website of companies that have obviously hired a drone aerial photographer, and it's a wonky, dark image taken on an overcast day with a curved horizon, obviously taken with a GoPro. And really, perhaps that they weren't aware that better cameras, better technology existed, so that they were probably chuffed with them. So in trying to find a USP for my business, I'm always pushing the professional level, the professional quality of the pictures that I take, and a lot of that is in the post-processing. In fact, I've just written a blog post about that. I can just give you a sneak peek if you like. Here we go, there's my website. So this was an original image that I took only last week. That's straight out of the camera with no post-processing done to it. So, the horizon's slightly off. It's got a very green tinge to it. You can see me down there. That's me standing in the field there. And then this is the post-processed version, which, looks considerably better. I'm not visible, which is the main thing. And yeah, it's people often don't realize that post-processing is such an important part of taking good photos. And it does help if an aerial photographer has a background in traditional photography, because then they'll know about compositions, rule of thirds, all these sort of things, how to use the camera correctly and use the right settings on it. So these are all things that I list in these guidelines of what to look for. And obviously, understanding the importance of light and the time of day. A lot of people think, oh, I'll take my photos at midday because the sun is brightest. In fact, there's a very useful app that I use called Photo Pills. I don't know if anyone here has heard of it. Basically, it uses a Google Maps interface, and you put in a postcode of the property or whatever it is you're photographing, and then you just dial in the time of day that you want to photograph it, and it puts a little line that shows the angle of the sun. And I find it incredibly useful because I can say to my client, okay, I can see your house on the map here. I can tell you that after about 1:30 you'll start to get sun on the front of the building, and so I can then arrange my shoots for that day according to where the sun will be. Unfortunately, the app doesn't tell me if it'll be cloudy on that day, which is a constant nightmare. But it's something I've got to just get used to. That's really all I was going to talk about this evening. Drones are here to stay. They're an extraordinary force for good. They're, I'd say, a magnitude greater of beneficial and civilian and useful applications for these things than there are bombing people to bits, really. The range of applications that I talked about earlier, it's just incredible what people are doing with the technology these days. And provided the people that fly them know what they're doing, they're very, very safe. And if there is a component failure, because of the way they operate, like not flying over people or over roads, then even if it does crash, it's not going to be a problem. And I think we've only scratched the surface of what these things are capable of. And I shall leave you with a little video that I produced a couple of years ago. It was actually the same morning that I took... Oops. But I took that photo of St Martha's on the Hill. I just went up there for the morning because it was a lovely day, and I then took some other bits and bobs of video, some ground photos, and just put the following video together. It's nearly 4.5 years old now, so it's I could probably do a bit better if I tried again today, but it still seems to have a really nice feeling, and it resonates with people because it's a very... I'll stop talking and I'll just play it. Could we have the light off for this bit, please? that's where I'll end my talk for this evening. Thank you very much.
What a brilliant way to bring the whole evening together at the end. That was terrific.
Thank you.
I'm glad you resisted the temptation to use the theme music from The Vicar of Dibley.
Or Top Gun or something like that.
I can hear the Vicar of Dibley theme. But I think that really brought together all of the things that we've had throughout the evening, from the demonstration of the flying program outside, talking through how the technology has evolved. Something about my background that I find weaponized unmanned aerial vehicles quite exciting. But that's something to do with my background. And to see how that technology works, and it's the spin-offs from it, particularly how that tri-mounted gimbal can now effectively replace Steadicam and can be used in that way, that's a brilliant kind of leap of faith. And to go back to a point that Dave made very early on, this is an evolution of the technology from the handset and a Wii, which does motion sensor in multi-dimensions. Terrific technology. And I think that was a brilliant evening. Dave, on behalf of the club, thank you very much indeed for coming.
Pleasure. Thank you.